Yeah.
Let
Um,
me move my mic closer too. I think I can improve my setup here. Let's shift this here. How's that? Can you still hear me okay?
yes.
Okay, we're
Looks like we're getting closer. I'm seeing a little
uh-huh.
blue loading
Progress
thing,
bar. Nice.
and it looks like we are live. Okay, we are officially live. Um, Welcome everyone that's watching. I think we have one person already on Facebook. Thank you for watching. And I have an amazing guest here on the podcast, Mr. Shahid. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I'm Shahid Buttar. I'm an artist and a lawyer based in San Francisco, and just coming off the heels of a general election challenge to Nancy Pelosi in the 12th Congressional District. And very grateful for all the support from my neighbors. We got 80,000 votes to replace the Speaker of the House, and sort of currently in the phase of exploring whether to run again in 2022 while pursuing some creative projects. And at the moment, exploring the outdoors in the Great American West.
Nice, awesome. Okay, yeah. Well, let's see. Kind of have a list of topics that we're gonna go right into. I mean, well, before we get to that, we were just kind of talking about, an album that you're trying to drop, or some songs. Do you want to quickly talk about that and where they can find the music?
Sure, yeah. I've got my debut album, Get Out of Your Chair, is on Spotify, and I have a SoundCloud profile where I've posted the music that I've made since then. I am working on an album at the moment. I hope to have it ready sometime later this year. A couple of the tracks I've produced already that'll find their way onto the album include NSA versus USA and Ferguson to Jerusalem, about topics that might suggest themselves. It's a range of electronic music from funky house to dark tech and range in between. You know, people who dig hip hop or who dig electronic music, house in particular, anything in that spectrum might find themselves, hopefully, a few things to appreciate. I should say, just while we're on the subject of art, um, we lost Lawrence Ferlinghetti in the last 24 hours. Iconic beat poet, real definer of a legacy of San Francisco. And every spoken word poet, every poet, frankly, in the English language owes him a debt of gratitude, and I certainly do. And as long as we're on the subject of art, just want to give him a quite quick shout out and a blessing onto, wherever his soul leads. But we've lost a leading light. And I frankly was amazed to see him hang on this long. He was 101 years old. So, a blessing to have him this but yeah, his voice, like many others, will be missed.
Yeah, I read an article about him and some of his poems. They were super cool. And so he had a shop, street lights.
City Lights
Yeah.
bookstore, and I don't know to what extent he owned it, but he certainly identified very closely with it. Spoken there, several times. It's a bookstore that is iconic as Ferlinghetti is to the literary scene. It's on Columbus Street in North Beach. It's really kind of an anchor of the neighborhood, and it's right next to this bar called Vesuvio, which is also something of a landmark in San Francisco. They've both kind of become, frankly, the kind of tourist spots that you don't mind having been, mommed and picked up. But if you're in San Francisco, definitely check out City Lights Books. They do a lot of interesting book talks. Those are the contexts in which I've spoken there. And it was really an incubator of the literary scene that came out in North Beach in the 50s. That's the beat poetry generation, which included not only Ferlinghetti, but poets like Allen Ginsberg and others. And they really revolutionized a consciousness. Really, I give them credit for the precursors of the 60s counterculture, which then flourished 10 years later in San Francisco. We stand on the shoulders of others. And I certainly think that the beat poets played an integral role in advancing counterculture in the United States.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah. I don't believe I've ever been. Is it like near the Haight Ashbury, or it's kind of different area?
Close. Yeah, the Hate's my neighborhood. That's where I live. And Haight Ashbury is sort of like up the hill, basically. North Beach is more down by the coast, near the financial district, very much in the sort of northeast corner of the city, right along the water.
Is
Beautiful neighborhood,
but
incredible restaurants.
the shop is still going pretty strong, even
Oh
with
yeah, City Lights is still there. I'm sure that they've been challenged by the pandemic. The last time I passed by was a few months ago, and they were still going strong then. I would say, like a lot of independent bookstores, I'm sure that they're challenged, not only by the pandemic, but particularly by uh, a company owned by the richest man in the world. And I'm grateful for anybody who patronizes independent bookstores, because they are a pillar of our communities, not unlike libraries. And I do hope that City Lights gets all the support going forward that it has in the past. San Francisco is going through some pretty profound changes at the moment, particularly on account of a exodus of recent newcomers who are, just responding to the fact that they can work from anywhere rather than needing to be in the Bay Area, which is what work drove many of them to come. And in that context of that exodus, I think the city's identity is frankly being reforged. And I think that plays a role here.
For sure. Okay, well, let's get right into the topics. I know we're a little bit crunched for time. Um, I know we were talking about, should we have, a little discussion about, immigrant rights, stimulus checks, and I think, maybe we can touch on those. But something I'm a little bit kind of not confused, but yeah, I guess you could say confused. But yeah, if you wanted to speak
Yeah.
more about qualified immunity.
Yeah, thank you for that. So qualified immunity is a judicial created doctrine that insulates police officers from legal accountability for often very violent acts like killing people. It's a doctrine that says, among other things, if um, acting under color of law, if there's any possibility that a right that was violated was not clearly established, a police officer can get off. There's a whole range of other issues in constitutional courts, but QI, qualified immunity, is basically the shield behind which officers hide. Now, in 2018, our campaign to replace Pelosi proposed to end qualified immunity. In the time since then, after George Floyd died, was murdered by police, and Breonna Taylor as well, a mass movement emerged around the country. I've been incredibly proud of my neighbors around from coast to coast who've taken action in solidarity with the movement for Black Lives. And just to make this clear, before I can't breathe became a phrase that everybody remembers being uttered by a dying Black man in Minnesota, it was a phrase that everybody heard from a dying Black man in New York. Eric Garner died saying the same words 6 years ago, and we were all in the streets then too. And frankly, not much had changed between then and now. And ending qualified immunity would be a massive step forward in the battle to hold police accountable. Now, there's a thing that's worth noting here. People talk about, is it a few bad apples? One, the phrase is that a few bad apples spoil the bunch, which is to say, a few bad apples is no comfort. It's precisely the problem that we should be on the lookout for. And secondly, for officers who abide by the law and respect the people that they're charged to serve and protect, they welcome accountability for bad cops. And we shouldn't think about ending qualified immunity as anti-police. It's anti-bad police. It offers communities legal levers for justice when the people charged with enforcing the law undermine it. Now, recently in Congress, the movement to end qualified immunity has gained some traction. Just last year, people might remember a stunt with a whole bunch of people in Congress. I'm pretty sure Chuck Schumer was there. I know Nancy Pelosi was, and they were kneeling, wearing kente cloth while introducing the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. And then at the press conference introducing the bill, Nancy Pelosi forgot George Floyd's name and confused him with a comedian from the 50s. I won't chase that rabbit. There's so many things we might say there. But the movement to end qualified immunity, I'm grateful to say, has finally gained some steam. And basically now, as the movement's demands have evolved to include rationalizing our spending priorities by defunding police to reinvest in, for instance, social services, teachers, education, what have you, job training programs. As we've moved on to those demands, a group of centrist Democrats, particularly representing relatively conservative areas, have spoken up, and they're pushing back, not only against defunding police, which they've been doing, but more recently now against ending qualified immunity. And I would just quote Representative Karen Bass, who had a very compelling reflection here. She said, how many more people have to die to make the point? Police officers and police departments don't keep us safe. It's police departments from which many of our communities need to be kept safe. And the way through the law to make that happen is to ensure the police officers bear accountability when they break the law. And that's exactly what ending qualified immunity would do.
Dang. Okay. Well, yeah, that's making a lot more sense now for sure. And yeah, I
But I'm
was
doing my job right on.
and I was yeah reading like something on your Instagram and yeah it was pretty shocking to hear about the I guess it was the ex police officer just you know kind of well not kind of but yeah really going stepping out of line and for like someone that was I guess what is it prank ding dong
Oh,
ding kind of thing.
that case. Yeah, I remember now. Yeah. So that's a former San Francisco police officer, retired now, lives in the suburbs. But a kid playing, yeah, the doorbell ditch game, ding dong ditch. The guy, the cop, grabs him by the neck, drags him into a car, and threatens his life, says, I will put a bullet in your neck if you do that again. And this is a retired police officer acting, without a badge in the suburb. Think about what this person did over the course of his 25-year career. I think it was longer than that, even serving, protecting and serving the residents of San Francisco. It's a perfect reflection of the culture of policing. And it's precisely why we need to end qualified immunity, because there's no excuse for that. It's absolutely appalling. And I do think, that he should at least be ashamed. I don't think it's unfair to prosecute someone for making a threat like that, especially in so innocuous a situation. It just speaks to how police feel this impunity and the right, frankly, to do whatever the hell they want, and it's not acceptable.
And yeah, I feel you on that for sure. Like, um, let's kind of jump into another random, not random, but like another. It's kind of related in a sense, but like let's move forward because we're running a little bit out of time. Immigrant rights, and I did I saw the post again on your Instagram. Do you want to shout out your Instagram real quick?
Yeah, we're on all the social media platforms at Shahid for Change. That's SHAHID FORCHANGE. Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube.
For sure.
Just
Okay.
joined
Yeah.
Clubhouse last night. If anybody's using that, it seems
What
like
is it? Clubhouse.
Clubhouse. Yeah, it's
Oh,
like a
okay.
cross between Twitter and podcast almost. It's fascinating. I appreciated the dialogues that I fell into last night.
Nice. Yeah, here's some good things about that. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I saw an Instagram post and it was pretty interesting. Um, you know, I guess there's they're housing some teenagers. If you want to talk about that post, I guess it's technically the kind of it falls into the kind of the whole no more kids in cages sort of thing. If you want to briefly touch on that, because I know that is kind of a big issue that people are getting a little frustrated with.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. And I'm an immigrant myself, so this hits near and dear to my heart. President Biden just reopened one of the border detention camps, a Trump era camp, to house migrant children between the ages of 13 and 17. These are people that we don't have a legal right to detain in the first place. We fought a world war to give any asylum seeker the right to enter countries seeking asylum. These are people fleeing a climate crisis that we helped engineer. Or in other cases, violence, particularly from paramilitary gangs, enabled by military governments that we enable with our military industrial complex. It is absolutely appalling to me how immigrant rights have fallen on the cutting room floor. Don't forget that among the central promises of the Biden administration were to end Trump's war on immigrants, to close the camps. He didn't say he was going to abolish ICE, though we need to do that too. But he did promise to restore respect for international human rights, which he has committed to not doing now. And the reason this is so important, we have to consider this not just as a moment in time, but as part of a historical vector, a trend. And we have to consider what came before to consider what's going to happen next. And we're going to consider here both what's happened recently, and then I'm going to, sort of flip the script and consider what happened in Europe many years ago, not that long ago, within the last century. So in the last few years, we've seen Democrats, I'm thinking particularly Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, give former President Donald Trump $4.6 billion to fund concentration camps at our nation's borders to hold people who we don't have a right to legally detain. I went to San Diego to visit the border camps, or at least get as close as I could, in July 2019, after Pelosi signed that deal. Met with human rights advocates, heard about some of the situations there, didn't get to go inside, but toured the outside of several facilities, came to understand many of the dynamics there that have eluded the public discussion. And what's alarming to me is we've made not very much progress since then in advancing human rights. And frankly, we've seen a great deal worse happen. For instance, there are private detention facilities contracting with ICE where women have been forced to endure hysterectomies, sterilization techniques, eugenics, straight out of the Nazi playbook. And this is exactly what happened in Europe within the last century. Immigrant rights are a bellwether for freedom and liberties across a country. You might describe we immigrants as constitutional canaries in a coal mine. And we've been singing not just the deportation wave, but I want to discuss particularly here the way in which the surveillance targeting immigrants has undermined the privacy rights of US citizens. So this will take a second, but follow me here. So the FBI has a database, sophisticated surveillance, biometric surveillance system called NGI, the Next Generation Initiative. Now, what's interesting about NGI, not only is it the fact that it has 400 billion records. No, sorry, it has, that would be ridiculous. The last time I heard a statistic about it was in a congressional hearing about 2 years ago, and at the time it was 400 million records, biometric records collected from sources as innocuous as state departments of motor vehicles. So you go to the DMV, you sit to have your photo taken for your driver's license. So the FBI has been collecting those photos to create a biometric database. And it hasn't been limited to immigrants. It's been applicable to all Americans, but it was sold to the public initially as a program to facilitate the deportation of suspected criminals who were undocumented. And at the time, it was called the Secure Communities Initiative. Immigrant rights advocates around the country were screaming bloody murder. And it took a lawsuit by an immigrant rights clinic at a law school in New York, by an immigrant rights group out of Los Angeles, and they sued ICE in federal court under the Freedom of Information Act. And they got the documents proving that it was never an ICE program. And it was never limited to immigrants. It was an FBI program designed to create a biometric surveillance scheme targeting all Americans in dramatic contravention of our constitutional rights, using immigrants as political bait. And that's why I'm, aside from being an immigrant myself and recognizing the rights of people very similarly situated to me, I recognize that we immigrants and our experience with the law, it presages what will happen to others. And as I witness the rise of bipartisan authoritarianism, I think there are a few policy areas that illustrate it in sharper relief than the ways in which we've increasingly turned, I don't want to use ableist language, we've increasingly buried our heads in the face of human rights violations of principles that we were once very proud to have pioneered in the world.
And I know in the past you've been pretty outspoken, and I remember you were mentioning something on one of a past event that I had with at the People's Town Hall event that you came on, and you actually spoke and performed some spoken word stuff and sang, which was amazing.
You're
And
kind. That was mad fun. Thanks for having me.
yeah, and we are, real quick, I want to mention, yeah, we are doing another one March 10th, and so if anyone can check that out, I recommend it, and everything. So yeah, but yeah, I know you said you kind of you had some issues when you were speaking up on some of these surveillance kind of policies. Do you want to quickly tell about that incident?
When you said some issues, would you just be a little more
Like
specific?
I guess you mentioned that like you had they I guess tried to arrest you for speaking up on
That, yeah. I wasn't sure if you were talking about that or YouTube censoring my comments when I talked more recently about it. Yeah, my Senate arrest in 2015, I was arrested in the US Senate for an act of journalism. I asked a question after the conclusion of a Senate hearing. This was a hearing chaired by the late Senator John McCain in the Senate. It was an Armed Services Committee hearing, and I think it was February or March, about this time of year in 2015, if I believe, yeah, 2015. And one of the hearing witnesses was James Clapper. He was the director of national intelligence under the Obama administration. He was a central figure in the Snowden leaks, the Snowden revelations, I should say. And I'll give you the setup, and then I'll give you how that incident resolved. And frankly, it hasn't resolved at all, because in fact, it leads right back to the question of the discussion we were having 10 minutes ago. So it might have been 2013 in the spring, Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon asked a question of James Clapper, this person who I asked a question of 2 years later. And Senator Wyden asked James Clapper, is the NSA monitoring millions of Americans? And Ron Wyden knew, in fact, that of course, yes, it is. He's the senator on the Intelligence Committee, and he was trying to get the public aware of a problem that he was informed about, but that hadn't been the object of public discussion. And James Clapper says, no, not wittingly. Many months later, after being proven wrong, after it being revealed that he lied, he admitted that his answer, in his words, was too cute by half. But at the time, life moves on, Senate goes along. There happens to be a court case around the same time before the Supreme Court, Amnesty International versus Clapper, this very same person, the director of national intelligence. And the Supreme Court tosses out the case. It was a case challenging mass surveillance by the NSA, targeting particularly the clients of lawyers and the interview subjects of journalists. And Amnesty International was the organization bringing the suit. Supreme Court tossed out the case saying, there's no evidence that this is happening. No one can prove that the NSA is monitoring them, conveniently just deferring to the fact that all the evidence is secret and the government has it all. And so the reason no one can prove that they're being monitored is because of the very executive secrecy that is objectionable here. So it's basically the court taking itself off the table as a guardian of intra-branch legitimacy. So first, Ron Wyden asked Clapper this question in the Senate. Then the Supreme Court throws out this case. It was about a month after that a young man, a contractor at an accounting firm, released to the world incredibly damning evidence of our nation's just complete, I don't want to say ignorance of, because that's too charitable. We know about our constitutional rights, and our federal government across both parties for now 20 years has decided with impunity to violate our not just constitutional rights en masse, but core components of the separation of powers. That's one of the important parts to get at here. What Edward Snowden revealed was not created by statute. It was created in secret by the Bush administration in violation of statutes, in violation of constitutional explicit protections. And then it was legalized by Congress afterward, particularly under the Obama administration. And that pattern also harkens very frighteningly close to one, again, that we saw in Europe 100 years ago that led to very gnarly things, the legalization of unconstitutional rights violations, not just targeting a single person or community, the entire United States. One element of this that people sort of skipped over at the time, Edward Snowden revealed that the entire city of Salt Lake City was being monitored for a year leading up to the 2002 Olympics. An entire city without any constitutional basis, without any basis for suspicion, no individualized basis for suspicion. I mean, like straight out of authoritarian regimes' playbooks. So fast forward to 2015, James Clapper is testifying in this hearing before John McCain. Hearing closes, McCain gavels it shut. I stand up like any journalist would, and I ask, Mr. Clapper, just as I had asked his lawyer, Bob Litt, at the Cato surveillance conference about 6 months before, how do you justify never facing a charge for perjury, that is lying under oath, for lying to the Senate about mass surveillance, when Eric Garner was just killed in the street in New York without a charge, without a trial, on the suspicion that he was selling cigarettes without a license? And of course, there is an answer to that question. He didn't give me one. He walked out of the room with an entourage and a pension, and I walked out in handcuffs. And it is revealing to me that the incident, the scene where you see Eric Garner breathe his last breaths while saying, tragically, I can't breathe, the only person involved in that entire scene who went to jail was the person recording the video. That's the state of justice in America. That's why we say Black Lives Matter. That's why we're in the streets, because our system, you could say, either is irrevocably broken, or you could say that it's functioning precisely as it was intended and operating entirely too efficiently as an oppression engine. And that, in either case, harkens back to Europe within the last century. And I'm terrified, frankly, of the authoritarian emergence across contexts, whether it was immigrant rights, whether it's police violence, whether it's the unaccountability of an executive branch that just thumbs its nose at. And here it's not just the fact that powerless people are at risk of lethal so-called justice for trivial reasons. And it's not just the fact that powerful people are getting pensions for lying to Congress and abusing our rights. The two of them together are particularly revealing about what the United States represents, stands for, and embodies in this moment in our history. And as a proud immigrant to a country that has long been committed to a set of principles that have inspired the rest of the world, I'm not willing to let that go. I'm very happy to get arrested if I have to. I'd rather get into Congress and help make some better decisions. That's why we ran in 2020, and while I likely might again in the next cycle.
Awesome. Yeah. And then do you want to quickly touch on what I was um, what you thought I was talking about the YouTube thing?
Yeah, right. Thank you. So fast forward. So we talked about Wyden asking Clapper those questions in the Supreme Court. That was 2013. When I got arrested in the Senate was 2015. So fast forward another 5 years after that, 2020, early in the year, about this time last year, Nancy Pelosi just got done impeaching Donald Trump and then losing the conviction in the Senate. And I can talk a lot about why and how that was entirely predictable and frankly Pelosi's fault for hamstringing the process at the outset. But the important part here is that just after the impeachment process, a couple sections of the Patriot Act that were set to expired for the first time in 20 years. We'd been trying to make this happen for ages. And every time, on no fewer than half a dozen occasions in the last 20 years, faced with these impending deadlines, Congress, without any debate, without any examination, has bent over backward to ensure that these programs continued. This was the first time in 20 years that they expired as scheduled. And then Nancy Pelosi bent over backward to revive them and expand them, expanding Trump's surveillance powers. And we know how completely corrupt that man was, how willing he was to bend the federal apparatus to his personal will. And this is the person that the Democratic Speaker of the House, who had, a year before given $5 billion for border concentration camps, this is the figure that she chose to empower by reviving these expired Patriot Act surveillance provisions. So I had an interview with a journalist in New York. His name's Walker Bragman, inspired, thoughtful young man. I encourage you to check him out at Walker Bragman, at least on Twitter. I'm not sure what his other social media handles are. But we were discussing, among other things, the emergence of the COVID pandemic, because it was very new at this point, and this effort in Congress to extend and expand mass surveillance. And he did not save a local copy because he posted it directly to YouTube. And within minutes, YouTube censored the video, effectively erasing it. And the irony here is we were talking about secret government surveillance and a congressional race without any press attention to enable it and legalize it. Again, straight out of the Nazi playbook. And when we talked about it, when we tried to get the word out, it's a Google subsidiary scrubbing it off the internet. And this is a threat to our democracy that frankly has drawn a lot of attention. There was a hearing in a House committee earlier today about this. And it was denominated particularly in terms of misinformation, but one of the inevitable questions and issues that emerges in that context is the content moderation of corporate online platforms like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And, we've been not only did YouTube take down that interview, which we then redid and reposted the next week. So that interview is available on YouTube if you look for it. But, a very live issue, a supporter on Twitter in just the last couple of days posted a screen cap showing that our campaign's content is being publicly suppressed. Basically flagged as if it's objectionable. The objectionable tweet was one saying that Biden has abdicated his responsibility by saying that there's nothing he can do to prevent COVID deaths, which is of course ridiculous because we could pass Medicare for all. We could pass universal paid sick leave. We could pass a UBI that would enable people to stay home and survive if they have to, rather than put themselves and their families at risk in order to put food on the table. There are a million things we could do. And frankly, some of them we are. But the idea that he just throws his hands up in the air right after having won office is just an incredible abdication of leadership. Nothing in that violates Twitter's terms of services. Nothing in that is hateful or objectionable. But yet, these posts, and just to be clear, I just won 80,000 votes to replace the sitting Speaker of the House. So if Twitter is going to censor our voice, it's kind of hard for that not to lean on the political scale. And I am as alarmed by it in the context of Twitter as I am in the context of YouTube, as I am when I've seen change.org or Medium also censor whistleblowers trying to get the word out about their experiences. It's this idea of corporate platforms effectively owning the internet and guarding it and being in a position to silence speakers is a real problem. And I know you didn't ask me this, but just to put this out there, a lot of the proposed solutions to that real problem are ham-fisted and moving in the wrong direction. There's a rich conversation to be had about antitrust law and how it could be the remedy here that would help fix the problem without throwing out the constitutional baby with the bathwater of trying to deal with a real problem in election disinformation.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. So, okay, well, you did mention some things, about stimulus. We could, maybe you can touch on some of that, but and some other issues that I have been hearing just from some of my pals,
Yeah.
who I actually believe that are in the Bay Area, and because stimulus is a big thing, but like also, what do you think about the whole, I guess, college, the student debt, that kind of issue, like, what's your take on that? Should, because I know some people are saying it's not fair if we get rid of student debt because the people before us didn't have to do that. They didn't have that opportunity to raise all their student debt. And so what do you think? Should like 10K or 50K? What do you kind of think? What's your opinion on it?
Higher education shouldn't be a ticket to lifetime indentured servitude. I graduated from law school 20 years ago. I'm still $50,000 in debt, and I've been paying my student loans the whole time. I graduated with $250,000 in debt, which for a person without a rich family is basically an indenture. And the idea that there's some sort of moral hazard, people who make this point that, oh, it wouldn't be fair because, some rich people might get a benefit there. If we just made sure that wealthy people paid their taxes, it would, frankly be not just a wash. We, the people, would come out profoundly ahead. And, we shouldn't look at this through the lens of the risk of benefit migration. We should look at this through the lens of the benefit of universal programs. Universal programs bring us all together. In contrast, programs that attempt to provide benefits according to any kind of set of delineations inevitably create divisions. Think about the response to affirmative action programs versus the way in Europe anyone defends their national health service as an object not only of national pride, but like individual security, health security, right? I think there's a lot to say here. I think the essential root, if we try to get down to the very bottom of it, is a willingness to disregard people's lives and human dignity. And this is one reason why I'm committed not only in this context to a progressive policy, but whether in the climate justice context, the universal healthcare context. We have to put human beings at the center of our public policy calculus instead of putting capital at the center of our public policy calculus. And I see that as inextricable a principle here as in any of those other contexts.
So was I think something passed for Californians to get a stimulus coming their way pretty soon? Is that true?
There's Governor Newsom has his own budget. I frankly do track Congress more closely than I do Sacramento. So I can't speak about it with the same level of depth, if only because, again, there's a different set of targets that I'm focused on. But yeah, there are state level stimulus measures as well. California's, if I recall correctly, is in the billions. A useful nod and hopefully meaningful in the lives of the people who qualify for it. When we talk about universal programs, like we were talking about in the context of student debt relief, that has to be at a scale that will dwarf anything that any state, even one as prosperous and large as California, can pursue. Student debt relief is one of those issues that, another point to make here, people often reduce it to a generational issue. And obviously, many young people would benefit from it. But there's many elderly people and any number of people in my generation who are also weighed down by the weight of student debt. I see the most maybe impactful implication of the student debt crisis in diminishing and decreasing birth rates. So in the United States, we have historically declining birth rates, and there's lots of good reasons for that, like women having access to more and more opportunities. It seems that in the last several years, one of the factors driving that is the economic insecurity that many millennials have encountered. And the fact that millennials have so little wealth, for instance, relative to their counterparts in previous generations when they were at comparable points in their lives, is a reflection of the failure of our economy to meet the needs of the people in it. And when we have declining birth rates, it suggests system failure. And one thing you might do in the context of that system failure, if you have declining birth rates, is to open up the country to more immigration. But as we just described and talked about, we're not even willing to acknowledge the rights that we used to fight for immigrants to have. So, we're discussing now the intersections between different policy areas, but I see the student debt also implicating some of these other principles in similar ways.
Cool. Well, thank you for touching on all those subjects. I was also looking at your Instagram and some of the let's see. I was just gonna ask, like, are some of the good podcasts? Do you recommend it? Because I know you posted one with Cornell West as a guest on I believe it was Marianne Williamson's podcast. For people that want to kind of learn more and that are interested in podcasts, do you recommend that one? 'Cause,
Yeah, I mean, I love each of their voices for similar overlapping and also distinct reasons. What I would say defines both Marianne Williamson and Cornell West as thought leaders. They are both grounded in not just a political vision, but I dare say, spiritual commitment to the dignity of all people. And they are very much advocates for all people. And they do it with such a tremendously compelling combination of intellect and inspiration. And every time I've heard Cornell West speak, he blows my mind. I learned so much. And my interpersonal interactions with him, were limited to dancing to a Prince song on the floor of the California Democratic Convention 2 years ago. But like, it will forever be emblazoned in my mind. It's one of my favorite memories. And similarly, I had an opportunity to basically share a telephonic sort of like ceremony, I suppose you might say, with Marianne last year in the middle of the campaign. And each of them have been such tremendous supporters of not just my voice, but a movement that stretches beyond any of us. It's not me, it's not them, it's us, right, with a capital U. And to hear the two of their voices together in conversation, I was just, frankly thrilled by. Some other podcasts I put out there. I'm a big fan of Ryan Knight. He's a voice who's come a long way in terms of his own political evolution and learning, and really insightful, committed voice. He has been instrumental in helping promote challenges to the corporate Democratic Party and leaning into this project of defending the future from the predation of the past. He's another podcaster I really appreciate. Have a lot of love for a network, Southern California podcasters and videographers who include Fiorella and Craig Pasta-Jardula, Ron Placone. There are others, including personalities who've taken a lot of heat, who've been gracious in offering me a platform. Jimmy Dore comes to mind. Rania Khalek is a podcaster and videographer whose voice I especially appreciate. She's done some really clever, like TikTok style videos, really compelling ways to depict the contrasts that often escape public attention. The Gray Zone I put out there. I was just with this morning Katie Halper and Matt Taibbi, who have a podcast for Rolling Stone. And yeah, I think there are lots of, well, Kyle Kalinske, can't forget him, or Mike Figueredo at the Humanist Report. They're all inspired voices doing a lot to inform a great many people um, about the issues that we're confronting. And I'm grateful to all of them for having featured my voice and for having educated so many people about so many things. Just to throw some other names out there, because it's hard not to mention, Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur have also spread a lot of information. And I should say this too, among several of the people I just named, there's a lot of beef. Let's just throw into the mix, other people who have done a lot to educate people, include Nomiki Konst and Sam Sater at the Majority Report. There's so much beef within that community amongst it in different vectors and directions. And I mean, as somebody who's challenging an icon of corporate power, I really see all of us on the left as being on the same team. We often get confused about who our allies are. And we have to be very clear about who our enemies are. And our enemies include capital and apathy. And they unfortunately imprison entirely too many people. But everybody who I mentioned just now, as well as everybody in the squad with whom some of those people have beef, they're all, frankly, doing everything they conceivably humanly can to defend the future. And we have to be intelligent and sophisticated enough to recognize our allies and when we see them and embrace them, instead of tearing them down all the time. And that's a dynamic on the left that I really hope that we can get over and get around, because it's one of our central challenges moving forward. I think it's the divisiveness and willingness to tear down every voice, just
Yeah.
because it's an attractive target.
Crazy. Yeah, that's well. Thank you for sharing all that. So speaking of the squad and the future and everything, like, do you have any? I know it's probably irrelevant, but like any thoughts on 2024? Like, is it a Bernie or Marianne or AOC? Who do you think will be in the race? Pete?
God, I mean, I don't even want to guess. Pete, certainly, I could say will be in the race. He's not somebody who I hope gains the support of, and I don't want to necessarily go in on Pete, but yeah, I do think there are a lot of inspired voices who might run. Bernie, has been advancing in age. I hope that he's got the energy to do it again. I certainly would vote for him and redouble my commitments. I see the phrase "not me, us," which he popularized, having shifted meaning after his heart attack. Before his heart attack, I thought of "not me, us" as a slogan saying it's not about me, Bernie Sanders, it's about us, the United States, we the people of the world, frankly, standing up for each other. After the heart attack, I took it as not me, an older man who's dedicated his entire life to fighting for the cause, but us, you, me, all of us who will remain to do the work that Bernie will not be here forever to do. And, that so many things come out of that for me, and sort of what that entails and implies. But I certainly would love to see a voice from the squad seeking more prolific public position, whether that's in the Senate. For instance, I could see AOC likely taking a seat from Chuck Schumer. I would love to see that happen. That might be an easier road to hoe than one to the White House. Who's to say? I do think there are other people who offer some insightful other voices. For instance, Julian Castro comes to mind as a voice from the last presidential field, who I think made a really positive impression on a great many people, but frankly didn't have nearly the support as that others did. But he's a voice that I hope comes back. I'd love to see Marianne. I'd love to see Cornel West run for president. I'd just be
I
amazed.
thought that too. After seeing a little bit of the podcast, I was like, I wonder if he would ever give it a shot.
Oh my God. I just think it would be like, and he becoming the president of the United States would actually be the moment that a lot of liberals thought Barack Obama becoming the president would be. When Obama was and I wrote an article at the time when he won his election about how he was the first post-colonial president, and I still believe that that's significant, but symbolically, ultimately, if we actually had a Black liberation theologist, philosopher, social justice champion in the White House, I mean, my God, this country would never be the same. We'd actually have a chance at maybe realizing our commitments and our promises for once. And that's something I certainly hope to see happen. But any of those voices, I would hope to see back on the field. And I would just say this, I see the electoral process as a very fragile and beautiful instrument. The idea that the 300 million people can peacefully decide who will make our laws is a world historically inspiring, magnificent thing. And I really hope that we can get more community voices, more voices for the people, more people grounded in the historical and continuing struggle for liberation, as each of them are, as opposed to power grabbing careerists of the sort that we've been sending to Washington for the last generation. And with that, I might bid you adieu, but thank you so much for having me on tonight, Justin. It's been fun.
All right, Shahid. Yeah, you're an amazing person. I thank you so much for coming on. Looking forward to March 10th and that People's Town Hall and anyone out there watching or watching the rerun. Check that out. It's going to be interesting, and Shahid may or may not do some spoken word poetry, some music. So that'll be something to definitely check out. So you have a good rest of your evening, and let's stay in touch.
Right on, for sure. Let me just drop as well as if anybody wants to get more information about our campaign or get involved, we'd love to have you check us out online. We're at shahidforchange.us or just shahid.fyi. And you can find us on any of the social media platforms at Shahid for Change.
Sweet. Yeah. No music tonight, or we should wait for the March 10th. Keep them waiting.
Well, let's leave it as a teaser out there. I mean,
All right.
I don't want
Yeah.
to burn out the
You've had a
audience.
long day hiking, so I don't want to make you do that or anything.
I don't mind, but yeah, in the interest of keeping a teaser out there, I will promise now that I will at least drop a rhyme on March
Awesome.
10th. I look forward to it.
Sweet. All right. You have a good rest of your evening, Shahid.
You too. Peace, brother.
All right. Peace. Take care.
Bye, Justin.